The 20th century. Wow, what a period of unbelievable change. All over the globe, ideas that had stood for centuries about power, about who belongs where, about identity, they all started to get challenged and hard. This was a time when brand new ideas about freedom and human rights really took root, connecting people from all walks of life in a massive worldwide struggle for a better, fairer world.
But that gets you thinking, doesn't it? It all boils down to this one central question. How is a right actually won? Is it something that's handed down to you from on high, or is it a freedom you have to claim from the ground up? Let's dig into that by looking at the incredible movements that really defined the last century.
So, where does our story really begin? Well, it starts in the shadow of unimaginable destruction, a moment in history where the world literally had to come together to build a new foundation for what it means to be human.
Picture this. It's 1945. The world is in ruins after World War II. Out of that devastation, the brand new United Nations did something completely revolutionary. In 1948, they adopted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And let me tell you, this document was set to change our whole idea of justice.
You see, for centuries, pretty much everyone believed that rights were things that governments or kings gave to you. The Declaration just flipped that whole idea on its head. It said that your rights are inherent. You don't have to earn them. You have them just because you exist.
And this wasn't just some fancy philosophical debate, not at all. This was incredibly practical. The goal was to create a shield, a form of protection for the most vulnerable people in the world. We're talking women, children, refugees. It was a promise, a global promise, that never again would the world just stand by and watch such atrocities happen.
So you have this big, universal idea of human rights, and it becomes a spark. It gives specific groups of people the language and, frankly, the moral high ground to demand their own place at the table and to challenge generations of oppression.
And even before the UN put pen to paper, these ideas were already bubbling up. The Negritude movement, led by Black writers and artists in the French-speaking world, was this incredible cultural pushback against colonialism. It basically shouted from the rooftops that Black culture, art, and history weren't just valid, they were a source of immense power. This movement really provided the intellectual ammo for the anti-colonial and civil rights fights that were just around the corner. And those struggles, well, they led to some absolutely huge victories. Over in the United States, the Civil Rights Act landed a massive legal blow against segregation. And at the same time, the entire world was watching South Africa, where decades of fierce resistance finally brought down apartheid, which was just this brutal system of government-enforced racism.
And if you want a symbol of that injustice, look no further than Nelson Mandela. He was locked away for 27 years. 27 years, all for fighting for a free society. His long, painful struggle became a global rallying cry for justice. Meanwhile, a completely different global battle was being fought, this time for a woman's right to vote. And this wasn't just a one-off event. Oh no, this was a slow, grinding, worldwide campaign. As you can see, victories were won piece by piece, country by country, decade after decade. And every single one was a giant leap towards political equality.
But these movements weren't just about changing hearts and minds. Some of them went right for the core structures of power itself, from the church pulpit all the way to the government.
In Latin America, this radical new way of thinking called liberation theology started to emerge. It was a total rereading of Christianity. It argued that faith isn't a passive thing. Instead, it demanded that the church stand with the poor and oppressed and actively fight to take down the systems that were holding them down. This was a huge challenge to the church's own history of siding with the powerful. But sometimes, when you demand change, you're met with brute force. In the spring of '89, thousands upon thousands of students and citizens gathered peacefully in Tiananmen Square in Beijing. And what they were asking for was pretty basic stuff: an end to corruption, freedom of speech, a path toward democracy.
The government, though, well, they didn't see a call for a better country. They saw a direct threat to their control. They declared martial law, and this incredibly tense standoff began. Unarmed protesters on one side, and the full power of the state on the other.
And then, on June 4th, the world just watched in absolute horror as the military moved in. The crackdown was swift, and it was brutal. Hundreds, maybe even thousands, of unarmed people were killed. Tiananmen Square became this tragic, unforgettable symbol of that violent clash between the human desire for freedom and raw, authoritarian power.
Okay, so as the century wore on and the world became more and more connected, totally new kinds of challenges started to pop up. This forced activists to think bigger, to think globally, about everything from the health of our planet to the people who make the stuff we buy.
You've probably heard of Greenpeace, right? They became famous for their tactic of direct action. We're talking nonviolent but very confrontational protests. By literally putting their bodies and their boats in the way of things like whaling ships or nuclear testing, they grabbed the world's attention and put enormous pressure on both corporations and governments to change.
But that wasn't the only way. You also had these incredible community-up approaches. In Kenya, Wangari Maathai's Green Belt movement was built on such a simple but profound idea: plant trees. But see, this was about so much more than ecology. It was a process that empowered local women to heal their own land, to fight back against deforestation, and to reclaim their own future.
Globalization also brought tough economic problems. As companies moved manufacturing to developing countries, it often meant rock-bottom wages and really dangerous working conditions. The fair trade movement was born as a direct response to that. It pushed for a more ethical system, one that guarantees fair prices and safe conditions for the farmers and workers at the very beginning of the supply chain.
So when you take a step back and look at this whole century of change, a really clear picture starts to form. The fight for human rights, it's not just one story. It's more like a tapestry, woven from all these different but deeply connected struggles.
And here's the key takeaway, the thing to really hold on to. It doesn't matter if they were fighting for racial justice, for the right to vote, for freedom of belief, or for a healthy planet. All of these movements are part of the same big push. They all challenge the status quo, they challenge who gets to have power, and they all dare to imagine a more just world for every single one of us.
And that, of course, brings us right here to today. The progress that was made is undeniable, but it's also incredibly fragile. And in our super-connected world, new threats are showing up all the time, everything from our digital privacy to climate justice. So that leaves us with one final question to think about. What are the next frontiers for human rights, and how are we, all of us, together, going to rise to meet those challenges?